All right, so I'm going to be presenting on Who Moved My Pulpit. Chapter 1 is basically the introductory story about a pastor who felt like he had the total and unequivocal support of his members of his church. He felt confident in his ministry and his role as a pastor. One day he decided to remove the pulpit of his church without thinking it was a good move towards being more relevant and complementing his preaching style. But he did this without consulting anyone. And so on Sunday morning, he was totally blindsided by the response of the congregation. They were not happy. They were like calling him a heretic. It was really bad. It was horrific. And he made even a bigger fool of himself because he kind of freaked out and responded inappropriately. And then even trying to repair the situation, it did not work. And he said that because of all this, he lost 2 years of good momentum in the church because he made a mistake. And he failed. He didn't lead change incrementally. He didn't get any buy-in from the church. He didn't pray about it. He just went and did it in his own power. He didn't assess any unintended consequences. And he didn't even communicate about this to the church. He just did it. And his greatest failure was not dealing with the aftermath of the situation. And instead, he just emotionally withdrew. And he was ready to leave his church because of all of this. And he realized that he did not display positive leadership in the situation. And that if he wanted to see the church change, the change actually had to start with him. I thought this was a great little anecdote. It was a good example, and it's kind of a funny example. I thought it was a great first story to lead us into the book. So chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about unmovable church members. And there's a couple different kinds of unmovable church members in the church. The first one is the denier. They are impossible to lead and change because they don't even think anything needs to change. The entitled member treats the church more like a country club than the body of Christ. They're the ones who hold the pastor's salary above his head, and they expect all their personal preferences to be met in the service. My church, I should get what I want. They resist change because they don't want their way of doing things to be upset. Blamers are people who avoid accountability and obedience. They blame whoever they can for whatever they can, the pastor, the culture, the new church, the other congregants. These people resist change because they don't need change. It's everyone else with the problem. Critics are like blamers, but they're worse because they believe that the problems in the church are someone else's fault, but they also are blaming people and draining the pastor of energy. They're difficult. They always have a problem, and they also resist change. The last unmovable church member are the confused. These people are often well-intending church members, but they give highest priority to things that aren't high priority, like the pulpit. They may want to hang on to some kind of archaic tradition because they think it's sanctified or heretical, but it's actually just because they have a sense of security that they don't want to abandon. And so he says that to lead change in your church, despite unmovable church members, there are 8 steps. 1 is to stop and pray. 2 is confront the congregation and communicate a sense of urgency. 3, build an eager coalition. 4, become a voice and vision of hope. 5, deal with the people issues. 6, move the church from an inward focus to an outward focus. 7, celebrate the small and clear victories. And 8, implement change and never become complacent. So that leads us into the chapters following that describe each of these 8 steps on how to lead your church in change. I thought that chapter 2 was informative, and I think I'm sure that churches have all different kinds of people like this, and I can't imagine being a pastor of a church and having a brilliant idea, and a God-inspired idea perhaps even, and the people in the church don't want to support it. That's devastating to me. So, chapter 3, stop and pray. Before leading change, we have to stop and pray. Leading effective change in the church without prayer just does not work. You need to be praying diligently, but you also don't want to be praying just alone. You need some prayer warriors to join you in this season of change that you're wanting to bring about. You got to pray for wisdom. We must pray for courage, and we must pray for strength. Prayer is not an option in leading change in the church. It's foundational. I think that's brilliant. I think it's such a good reminder. I think especially when you just want to get something done, you don't want to take the time to pray about it because you feel like you already heard what the Lord said, but pray. I mean, it's God. He can always help us. Chapter 4 is about confronting the church and communicating a sense of urgency. So to bring change in your church, there are 3 major things that you have to do. First, you have to lead the congregation to face reality, that maybe change is necessary. And then you have to communicate the reality and the steps needed to move forward again and again and again and again. And finally, you have to communicate with a sense of urgency. They need to know that it's necessary to change, and that we have to. Numbers and stats are helpful tools in evaluating the church's reality. The average worship attendance of the past years, conversions, baptisms, attendance in specific ministries within the church. These statistics tell a major story. Another key in evaluating the reality of the church is to get some outside eyes, to evaluate the church facility. Is it accessible? And also to evaluate your worship service. What is it like for a brand new person who's never come there? If you want to improve, you need to hear the truth and face reality. In this chapter, he told a story about about a church who got an anonymous person to come in and evaluate the church. And she said that in the first couple minutes of the service, she knew that she would never ever come back. And it was because no one greeted her at the greeting time. They all knew she was new. They all looked at her, but no one said hi. That really shocked me. I'm thankful that my church, everybody hugs each other. Because that'd be a horrible experience. But yeah, pastors won't even be able to know that things need to change if you're not actively searching for what's going on. And he also says that the church members need to know about the realities of the church. So as you're gathering these stats or information or reports or whatever, they need to know. You can't hold anything back. You want to be brutally honest. This contributes to this sense of urgency. And basically it's you have to repeat this over and over and over and over again. You can't over communicate anything. He ends the chapter saying change or die. I think it's true. I think his argument is that church attendance is declining in America, and that there is a need to change or the church will die. Though I don't believe that that's necessarily theologically true, but I get what he's saying. Chapter 5, it's about building an eager coalition. You can't do it alone. You can't change your church alone. Lone Rangers don't last, and they don't even make good change. You need a committee. You need a committee, but you don't want a sinkhole committee that takes 3 years to make a decision, and then by that time, the decision's not even relevant. The coalition needs chemistry. It's like building your dream team of people. So they need to have chemistry. They need to be eager. They need to have the desire to move forward. They need to be optimistic and positive people. You want people on this team who hold key positions in the church. You also want people with influence. You want people with expertise, depending on what kind of change. You need a building fixed. You want to maybe get some architects. And you need people in the coalition who are just natural leaders. He said that setting this group takes time. It's usually informal. It's a lot of one-on-one. The bigger the change, the longer it takes to build up this group of people. But ultimately, the success of the change depends on this group of people who are supporting the pastor in this change. You can't do it all alone. Chapter 6 is about becoming a voice and vision of hope. And He says that a healthy church has a hopeful and a visionary pastor. People who are agents of change are also agents of hope. And I think this is true. The way that we look at change has to be rooted in the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. That is good news to change the world. True agents of hope read the Bible daily. They intentionally communicate hope to their congregants, and they regularly seek out and celebrate small victories of the church. He says that hope must accompany vision. Vision is critical to lead change, but leaders who shape a vision without a foundation of hope aren't doing the church any favors. Hope is foundational. And this kind of vision, it has to be strategic. The vision of change that you have for the church can't be like, we're revamping the whole entire church. Get specific. Maybe it's just a facet of the church's ministry. It has specific goals. It has a specified time frame, not soon, tomorrow. Like I read in another leadership book that if you're creating a plan for change, or like a church plan, you want to get your steps of action narrowed down to be so specific that you have real action specified that you can take tomorrow. Like that, the steps need to be so specific, and the time frame is so important. And then he says that this vision for change also needs to be brief and motivational. I think that's good, especially if you're presenting to a church of people who are maybe difficult members, like specified in the earlier chapters. You want it to be hopeful, brief, motivational, clear, cut, concise. People want to know really what's going on, what they're investing in, what their money's going towards. Chapter 7 is about people issues. There are seven principles of handling people issues. 1, the principle of loving people. If you love change more than you love people, you've already failed as a pastor. Pastors are called to love people. They're called to love and serve their sheep. And in order to love the sheep, you have to do it in the Lord's power. But the foundation of how we get the Lord's power is by loving people. Principle 2 is the principle of expected opposition. Most people don't like change. And so you will be criticized. You will be going against the grain a little bit. Expect it. Principle 3 is the principle of the eager coalition. Again, lone riders don't make any good changes. You need your team. Principle 4 is the principle of eating an elephant. How do you lead a church to change? One careful step at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And he said that the slowest pace you go still may feel fast for some. And so you want to just do it one little bite at a time. Principle 5, the principle of not delaying people decisions. So if you know you have to make a difficult decision with someone, don't delay. There's no better time for a breakup. Like there's no good time to break up with somebody, so you might as well do it when you think of it. Don't just push off because it's uncomfortable. Again, like good pastors love people, and so if you need to let someone go, you do it soon and honorably, because that's how you love people. Principle 6, the principle of losses. In any change, you're going to lose people. And that's just like, there's casualties, I guess. And you have to expect membership losses as you're changing. It doesn't mean it's not painful, but it just can't be unexpected for you. And finally, the principle 7 is the principle of ongoing prayer. Change begins with prayer, and it moves forward with prayer. You cannot stop praying. And because it's not us who changes people, it's God, we really need to be praying constantly if we're serious about igniting change in the church. I think these 7 principles are handy. I think they're just like good reminders. They're grounding for when you're feeling overwhelmed and wanting to change something. It's good to remember. Chapter 8 is the chapter on moving from an inward focus to an outward focus. He talks about how churches tend to start outward focused, but then they always end up predominantly inward focused. We start with the Great Commission, but then somehow all of our ministry gets like internally focused and we forget that we're supposed to be going out. So how do we change this? The leader, the pastor, must be outward focused. Like, change has to start with the leader. And so you as the pastor, as the one igniting change, you have to be intentional about remembering to be outward focused. The budget must be outward focused. Even if you have internal ministries, you want to see those ministries putting money towards somehow being outward focused. Because like the foundation of Christian ministry is the Great Commission. So we're always going out, bringing people in, going out, bringing people in. And leaders can do something incrementally to become outwardly focused. This doesn't have to be a night and day thing. But incremental change is always really useful in preparing the church for greater change. So again, small ministries can start incrementally doing things that are more outwardly focused, and then the church is more used to the idea of doing something like that. And then he talks about how you want to approach major changes by first picking the low-hanging fruit. Find something that's leaning towards a first step already and then head in that direction. I think that's a useful tool, especially if you're a big picture person or you're a big dreamer. Picking the low-hanging fruit is a really useful skill in incrementally changing things and not just flipping the whole place upside down. And chapter 9 talks about what it means to pick the low-hanging fruit. And so it's the idea of like doing trial runs. So he says, try trial runs of changes that you'd like to see before fully implementing the plan to enact total change. Let's say you want to pick up a new instrument. Before you buy it, rent it. See if you do it. And if you don't keep it, then you know it was good that you didn't buy it. If the success of your trial is evident to almost everyone in the church, there's like a sense of encouragement in the congregation, and there's enthusiasm towards change. And so you want to pick low-hanging fruit, you want the change to be small, and you want it to be like a trial run, and you want to let people know that this is what you're doing. It's a trial. And you want the results to be so clear, they can't be challenged by anyone in the church, whether good or bad. If it was successful, clear. If it wasn't successful, make it clear. And the results, hopefully, will be clear, compelling, and potentially paradigm shifting. And the success of your trial run, if it is successful, it needs to point to a greater desired change. So if you're going to be picking low-hanging fruit, you want it to already be fruit that you're kind of wanting to bring about in the church already. And so this stage of picking low-hanging fruit, like in the journey of transforming a church, is this stage can demonstrate the effort was worth it, whether good or bad. It can affirm the leaders of change. It clarifies strategies and tactics. How do we do it better? It's helpful in overcoming resistance. If the church is like, oh yeah, that kind of worked pretty well actually, then they're going to be more keen on supporting you in transforming the church further. And it builds momentum towards a greater change, because when you're seeing positive results, you want to see more of that, so people are more keen on buying in. Chapter 10 is about implementing change and never becoming complacent. So there are 5 keys for implementing and consolidating change initiatives. Strategy 1, over-communicate. People need to be reminded again and again and again and again. Over-communicate your vision and keep it before the congregation, even after specific changes are made. Remind them, this is our change, this is what we're moving towards, this is what we're doing. He says that change is not true until it's ingrained in the culture. And I think that's brilliant. Step 2 is transparency. Everyone wants to be fully informed, and especially millennials. They want to know everything that's going on. And people will stop trusting you as soon as they get the smallest sense that you're not telling them everything. And so just tell the church everything when you're changing, because they're a part of it anyways. 3, dealing with dissenters. There are always going to be people who are resistant to change. And as soon as the change is over, they're going to be like complacent again. They're going to resume in their complacency, but as soon as they sense change again, they're going to start dissension again within the church. And so you have to keep it in the forefront of everyone's mind that change is never complete. It's always going on. We're always changing. We're always growing. 4 is dealing with success. The congregation can also fall to that same sense of complacency because we did the change, we succeeded, and that was good. Now we don't have to change ever again. But he says that we can't measure success by one single event. And it's important to remember that biblical success is ongoing faithfulness. It's ongoing transformation. And the minute that we start to get comfortable after we've changed, we can fall prey to complacency. And the last key for implementing change is to deal with complacency. Leaders can fall victim to complacency because after a big change happens, they get worn out and they need a rest. But sometimes that resting time can go for too long, and then they start to lose their vision and they get kind of lazy and bored. And the number one reason for complacency is lack of vision. So you did your big change, but you didn't have any further plans, and so then you become complacent. So what's the solution for all this? Urgency. Pastors need to keep a sense of urgency in the forefront of their brains that church isn't a country club. It's not a place to get comfortable. It's a place of transformation. It's a place where God's always moving and God's always working. Urgency precedes change, it accompanies change, and it leads change again. And when urgency ceases, change ceases. And the church is no longer the church because they don't have to leave the building. And I think that's really good. I think revival happens because people get overcome with a sense of urgency and a sense of passion. And it's important to always remember that our work is never done here till the Lord comes back. And so then he closes the book reminding us that we're called to be great leaders in the kingdom of God, not just good leaders. And a life not fully lived to greatness is the worst kind of stewardship. It's not the life that we're called to. God's given us people to steward. God's given us people to influence, people to ignite, people to change and to transform so that they can go and change and transform the world. It's scary to ignite change, but it's far more scary to think about what happened if we don't change, if we don't preach the gospel, if we're not always growing. That's scarier. He says that it's a sin to be good when God has called us to be great. And then finally, he just reviews the process of leading change, and he goes over those 8 steps. Stop and pray, confront and communicate a sense of urgency, build an eager coalition, become a voice and a vision of hope, deal with people issues, move from an inward focus to an outward focus, pick the low-hanging fruit, and implement and consolidate change. Overall, I thought it was a great book. I thought it was a small, little handy book to have for any leader in the church who wants to implement change. And I don't think it has to be full church change either. It could just be wanting to see transformation in your youth group or your small group or your Bible study or whatever you're doing. I think my favorite part was becoming a voice and a vision of hope. I think that complacency occurs when we lose the notion that we have a living hope and that other people don't have that. And so when we forget that we have something that we have to share with the world, we don't change. We don't have a sense of urgency. We just get complacent and comfortable. And then that feeds into, all of those ugly parts of ourselves that are entitled or critical or blaming or denying or whatever that is. Like, when we have hope, I think we're far more keen on accepting change and being eager for it, because there's such good news out there. I think this is a good book to keep on the shelf. I mean, I'm not really a pastor even quite yet. I haven't been in one place of ministry for a year yet. So for me, this feels like good future information for when I am in a place for a long time and I want to see change. These are really useful reminders on how to do it, and how to not get overwhelmed, but also not too gung-ho. I think I'm more prone to getting too gung-ho. I'm too much of a visionary. So yeah, I thought the book was great. It's short, it's easy to read, super informative, and I thought he was quite candid and humble and honest in his storytelling, and the examples that he used, they were great illustrations, and it sounded like he was a true pastor. So that's my review and my overview on Who Moved My Pulpit.